Let me read to you a passage from the 16th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 1 to 13. It's the Gospel for the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. I will only read verses 10 to 13. The point of the reading that I would like to comment on is respect for the goods of others. St. Luke writes, quoting our Lord, "The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones, and the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If therefore you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and Mammon." That's from Luke chapter 16. What does it suggest to us? Well, at various times one comes across persons who have very little commitment to a great cause. They drift through life more or less just seeking personal satisfaction. There are others who spend their lives with very worthy commitments that give to their lives what might be a hidden but nevertheless a real nobility. Now, while the nature of these commitments varies enormously among persons, there are some people who are moved by the thought of serving others and building a just society while having little time for God. Indeed, they can reject God as basically a distraction from the true work of man in the world. There was, for example, the classic atheistic communist who strove to create what he regarded as a classless society while being intolerant of religion as being a harmful delusion. That is an extreme, but elements of it can be found in ordinary secular man who responds to the need to alleviate suffering in the world and to build a just society, but who can be profoundly prejudiced against a religious perspective. But then there is the opposite class of persons who are moved by the thought of God as the answer to the aspirations of the heart of man and society, but who have little genuine interest in the needs of man in society. As we consider the history of the world and the tapestries of cultures that make up mankind, we can perhaps see evidence of this polarity that I referred to. I suspect a case could be made for thinking that the Eastern religions, with their bent towards the absolute and away from the world, have had an impact on the slower development, material development, of their societies. Whatever of that speculation, there is certainly a difference in emphasis among various currents of Christianity. There is what we might call the Christian who speaks of God and Christ and who despises those Christians who speak constantly of social development. There is also the Christian who speaks of social, economic and political development and who despises all the God talk of the pious. The Church in her teaching of the Christian life insists on both. We are to love God with all our heart and our neighbour as ourselves. Indeed, we are to love our neighbour as Christ loves us. And our judgment will depend on this. In our Gospel today, our Lord tells the story of the steward who is discovered to have squandered his master's property. In the story, the same steward goes on secretly to engage in dishonest accounting in order to procure for himself the favour of his master's creditors, and so have friends to help him after his own looming dismissal. Our Lord concludes by referring to dishonesty, and that was the part I read. This setting of the parable can remind us of the Church's insistence that an essential element of the Christian life is that the rights of man in society be respected and served. The Church has, on the one hand, a vast body of teaching about our inner relationship with and love for Christ. This teaching flows from her dogmas, the encyclicals of the popes, the writings of the saints and doctors of the Church, and anyone who sets out to attain sanctity has plenty of approved spiritual guidance at hand. At the same time, the Church has a very extensive body of social teaching that is constantly expanding. Almost every pope since Leo XIII in the 19th century has developed this social teaching, and in it the Christian is able to find authoritative guidance as to his life and obligations in the world and in society. And all the Church has done in this is to unravel, in an authoritative way, the implications of revelation. The first of the 3 of the 10 commandments set forth our obligations to God as the foundation of the rest. And then in the next 7 commandments there is revealed what God requires of us in respect to our neighbour, including our neighbour's goods. Our Lord time and again insisted on love for neighbour and respect for his dignity and rights. Our parable today, concluding with our Lord's teaching, reminds us that this includes respect for our neighbour's goods. This respect for the goods of others is one of the linchpins of the common good of society, and if it is violated, and if a culture in which the violation of the goods of others becomes accepted, then true religion breaks down. For this reason, the authentically Christian person strives to know the Church's social teaching, and then progressively knowing it, he knows how to promote respect for man in society. He insists on respect for promises made and contracts agreed to, and the restitution of goods that have been damaged or taken away. He promotes the payment of just wages. He promotes a culture that will have nothing to do with fraud and the evasion of legitimate taxes. He does not accept the abuse of private or public property, nor work deliberately done poorly, nor waste. He respects the goods and property of others, and of his employers, and of society in general, all as part of respecting the dignity of every man and woman. He opposes all forms of dishonesty. He takes an interest, and if possible, participates in political action, and his guiding light is the Church's social doctrine, knowing as he does that the Church speaks in the name of Christ, and in her doctrine applies Christ's teaching to the life of individuals and societies. Let us then think of the steward of our gospel today, who squandered and misused his master's goods, and let us resolve to live as a true member of Christ in society and among men.